What is up, Bills Mafia? Little afternoon edition of Shout, a Buffalo Bills football podcast. He's Ryan Talbot. I am Matt Parrino. We had to get you a little something, whet the appetite for Friday night's big show live at Wingnuts, June 23rd, 8 p.m. Get there a little early. We'll be kind of hanging out, talking Bills, eating wings, drinking beers. It is a great time. If you follow either Ryan or I on any social media platform, you've seen the advertisements for the event. 700 Military Road in North Buffalo, Wing Nuts inside Froth Brewing Company. Ryan, it is going to be an absolute blast. I cannot wait. The patio's open. It is going to be a beautiful night.
Yeah, always great time at Wingnuts. Now that the weather's changing, though, the patio, you get the garage door, so to speak, opening up. So, we're usually packed at these events, Matt, shoulder to shoulder, large crowds. It's going to be nice and cool in there now because of the way they can open things up. I cannot wait for Friday night.
They are large crowds, but what we try to really do is just hang out, move table to table, come up to us. Like if you do come out to this event, we want to talk to you about all things Bills that you want to get into. Also, get an inside scoop. We got a big change coming to our coverage next month, an exciting one. We'll give you the inside scoop if you come out to Wingnuts. We'll talk it over, get your thoughts, maybe get your input on how you want this thing to roll out. It's going to be super exciting. All right, Ryan, I kind of teased this last week in our episode that I wanted to get into a Kaiir Elam topic. And because of the loyal listeners that we have, Caleb over on Twitter reached out to me and said, don't forget your Elam side topic for tomorrow's show. And let me just say, it's going to be pretty much our whole show, because what I want to talk about are what we think are the top position battles that are going to be waged next month, starting in training camp. And I think where I want to start is that cornerback 2 battle opposite Tre'Davious White. And it's so interesting because I had this idea last week as I was watching minicamp, and then I went on Sal Capaccio's podcast with John Scott last week, and he asked me, like, what is my big takeaway from minicamp outside of the Stephon Diggs stuff? And the only thing that came to mind was, I really wish, personally, this is my opinion, the Bills wouldn't have re-signed Dane Jackson. And I think when you first hear that, you're probably like, wait, what? This is good competition. This is a veteran. This is a guy that has played important snaps. I personally love Dane Jackson. I love all my interactions with him. I think he's a really good player. Like if you have to get him into the lineup, I think he's a reliable player. But what I think it's done is it's allowed the Bills to kind of coordinate this battle. And they were going to coordinate it anyway. I mean, as Brandon Beane said, you always want guys to earn their reps, earn their job. But I can't help but think with Dane Jackson on the roster, with Christian Benford ascending, this continues to put Kaiir Elam in this perceived or real doghouse that, I don't know. I want to talk about where you think he is positioned right now in this battle and where it projects once we get to training camp. And we'll get into a little bit more of this here.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I almost feel like everyone's starting at the same spot, and you would think that a former first-round pick would have a leg up on the competition in terms of we want to get this guy on the field. I feel like Sean McDermott is going to play it safe at that position because he wants to be aggressive elsewhere, whether that's up front, whether that's using blitzing with his linebackers. And if you're going to do that, you can't be getting burned on the back end. And I'm not sitting here saying that's what's going to happen with Kaiir Elam, but he puts a lot of stock into how these players practice throughout the week in terms of getting them onto the field for better or worse. And listen, you need to practice, you need to be there, you need to do your job. But you also want to develop these young players, and Kaiir Elam's a former first-round pick for this regime. So you want to get him on the field. You want to get him those reps, let him learn from his mistakes on the fly. Whereas if he makes a mistake on the field at practice, that might count against him come game time. And you mentioned Dane Jackson. Dane Jackson is Mr. Reliable. We have both compared him to being the new Levi Wallace. He's not going to necessarily break up every throw that comes his way. He's not going to get these great jumps on the ball, maybe intercept it, but he's going to keep the play in front of him. He's going to be a sure tackler. He's not going to let that team beat you for a 40, 50-yard gain. And in McDermott's world, that's probably been great because opposite him, when you have a healthy Trey White, you know what you're getting in that end of it. You have a great safety trio this year, and you could even argue even deeper than that. So you're strong in all these positions, and you want to just make sure you're not getting beaten out at that opposite cornerback spot. So going into camp, in my opinion, Matt, it's truly neck and neck and neck between Kaiir Elam, between Christian Benford, a second-year player who has a lot of zone experience from his college days, and then obviously last year, and then Dane Jackson, who you know exactly what you're getting for better or worse.
You said it right there, Ryan. All this experience that Benford has from his college days. How's Kaiir Elam going to get this experience if he's not on the field? Like philosophically, I struggle to understand the disconnect between the talent evaluators, the drafters, Brandon Beane and his team, and the coaching staff as they're working with this guy. Like my sense is just from being around, a lot of people within the organization, listening to them talk about, Kaiir Elam over the course of the last year, it's just like they're waiting for something from him. But it's just like, I don't understand how, like, if you're starting something from scratch, right? Like if you're really good at, I'm a journalism instructor at UB, right? So like maybe you're really good at English all through high school, right? You wrote great term papers, you have great sentence agreement, like, you know how to write, right? But then you come into college and you say, hey, I want to write for a newspaper. And there's a completely different style. You have to use AP style. You have to be much more succinct. You have to be much more, you have to get to the point a lot quicker, as opposed to term paper writing where you want to write kind of like for that number count, right? It's completely different game that we're playing. And so the only way I tell my students they can get better at doing journalism and writing in this form is to do it constantly. Read it and then do it, write it and do it over and over again. And I just think that practice is valuable, but I think Kaiir Elam needs to be on the field. I wouldn't be opposed to them just giving him the job, letting him have all of those reps and seeing how it progresses. If you're that confident in Benford and Jackson, who's to say that 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks into the season, you can't turn it over to them if Elam isn't giving you what you need? And I just think that there are valuable learning experiences, good moments and bad moments that he'll have that you're potentially, taking away from him if you don't just let him have that runway to learn.
Yeah, you need live reps, and live reps in practice are one thing, but the more and more you go against your own teammates, the more you pick up on their tendencies and what they do. And that's not the same as going against a completely different player that you watch on film for the week that you prepare for. He needs those live reps in game to get better. And I'm hoping that because of his draft status that they're going to give him those opportunities, because you said it so well. You can always go back to Dane Jackson. You can always go to Christian Benford, another young player that you want to get more live reps in this system if need be. But you drafted Elam in the first round. You traded up a few spots to go and get him. It's sending a bad message to your fan base, to this player, if you're not letting him get those live reps. And it worries me a little bit if Elam isn't slotted in at that cornerback 2 spot by the end of the summer, because you have young players that you want to get in at middle linebacker. You have a young player that you drafted in the second round to compete for a guard spot. Are you going to let them go and try to win those spots and get those live reps in game? Or are you going to go with the status quo and give it to those veterans that you have on your roster? Because there's veteran options at linebacker. There are veteran options on the offensive line. There are veteran options everywhere on this team. But you have to draft and develop these players. And I feel like the development part has been lacking a little bit the last few seasons.
And maybe we're not seeing the plan. Maybe the plan is, they believe in his ability to withstand this competition and being placed in certain spots and, maybe not being handed the job. Like he's built to deal with that. And that's something that we can't project or really know because we're not in the meeting rooms. One thing that like stuck out to me that Brandon Beane said, and I don't know if we mentioned it on this podcast, I've said it multiple times about Elam when asked about him. He's like, I wish I could sit here and tell you that he doesn't practice well, because he does. He practices well. And it's like, and I'm paraphrasing there, obviously, but it's almost like, why do you wish you could say something like, there obviously are problems around how you either view him as an organization at this point, or with how the lack of, meeting of the vision for the player when you drafted him versus how you were going to deploy him and implement him as a player on the other side. And I get liking guys. And listen, I talked about this on Gene and Mike's show on Tuesday about the kind of players that Sean McDermott traditionally likes. I mean, go back to Josh Norman, right? Like this, I can't remember if he was either a late round pick or an UDFA, ends up coming on and becoming this superstar quality player who impacts games in so many ways from the psychology perspective, not just as a player, but like he was this like generational player in terms of how he came up. And I wonder if Sean McDermott just doesn't like fall into this trap of looking for those scrappy guys because it worked this one time.
Yeah, that might be the case. And listen, last year, I kind of understood the why the Bills hesitated to get Elam onto the field. You had Trey White coming off of an injury where he wasn't ready to go at the start of the season. So you had Dane Jackson slotted into one spot, Mr. Reliable. You knew you were going to get. So the other spot, though, you wanted to get someone that at least had some background in your zone defense and your scheme. And yes, it was a rookie in Christian Benford who got a lot of live reps there, but because he had so much practice there, he probably picked up the defense that much faster than Elam did. And Elam had some struggles that he's alluded to, the coaching staff's alluded to in terms of transitioning over to this defense. But now in year 2, Elam needs to get out there on the field over Christian Benford, over Dane Jackson, because Trey White, this is a year and a half later after he's been back. He came back on Thanksgiving 1 year ago. You're expecting him to return to form. You have the safeties back there. You have all the pieces minus Tremaine Edmonds in front of him. So you're bringing back pretty much the band's back together, so to speak. Now is the perfect time to get Kaiir Elam out there, to get those live reps, to let him use his athleticism, to let him learn from his mistakes. And if the Bills don't do that at the start of the season, I think they're making a big mistake.
Yeah, and we got a comment over here on YouTube. Tony Zark, if it wasn't for how the Bills handled him during the offseason, I feel like most of us would think of him differently. I don't think he was bad at all during the actual season, to be honest. I agree. And maybe there wasn't maybe he didn't have this excellent rookie season with all these interceptions and just knowing the scheme and doing all the things that the coaches wanted him to do. I get all of that. Like there's a learning curve for a guy that's being asked to play a completely different style of football. But if you're talking about a competitive perspective, like the Bills just put out a video. I watched it this morning. I got a thing on my YouTube, so I checked it out. It was of Terrence Gray on the scouting trail, like looking at players at pro days and then at the combine. And it had a clip in there of like Brandon Beane and I think it was Brian Gain and Gray watching Dorian Williams run the 40, ran the 4.54. They were all just super excited about the speed element. And like rewind 1 year, that's exactly what got them juiced about Kaiir Elam. I think sometimes the scheme is important, but also, Ryan, I'd push back and say the scheme hasn't mattered the last couple of years when it's mattered the most, and your scheme has let you down. Maybe you should push more towards those traits and those ability to recover from mistakes that I think the speed of Elam gives you, and let him try to get into some level of comfort. And maybe they will, and I'll reserve judgment for that, but I'm very interested to see how this thing plays out, because as I'm looking at it right now, and this is the last point on this, and I'll hand it over to you to respond. If I was projecting based on just what my read is on the situation and, hearing from people talk about him the last couple of weeks, Elam, that is, I got it like Jackson and Benford is 1A, 1B in terms of the battle, and maybe a 1C in Elam, but definitively behind both of those guys going into summer. That's crazy. I can't believe I'm saying that.
Yeah, so the scheme itself has worked out in terms of the regular season stats where the Bills have been. They've been a top 3, top 5 defense in a lot of spots, but you can't play it safe at some of these key positions. To your point, you need to let these guys with the pedigree, these guys that have the traits, as you mentioned, get out there to be those game changers for you, because as good as a scheme can be for you, you need those difference makers. It's why they went out and they signed a Von Miller last year. The scheme can be sound up front. You can do certain things well, but there are still going to be holes in your play from a pass rush perspective. So insert Von Miller. The scheme was fine in terms of overall statistics for this defense the past few seasons, but they were getting beat up in the run game at times. Enter Daquan Jones, enter Poona Ford this year. You bring these guys in to be problem solvers. They need a problem solver opposite Trey White at corner. I think that can be Kaiir Elam, but they need to let him grow into that job on the job, out there week in, week out, getting the majority of the reps.
Ryan's going to get the majority of the reps with beer in hand and wing in other hand on Friday night at Wingnut, 700 Military Road. If you're just joining us now, thank you for hanging out with us late on a Wednesday afternoon. Both of us had commitments later tonight, so we want to get in this Wednesday staple show. We're talking about, some of the position battles that are looming. And there's not a ton, Ryan. Like if you look at like the starter spots, right? Depending on how you want to like figure out that third wide receiver deal, and we'll talk about that in a little while. To me, it's CB2 and then it's middle linebacker because there's a couple of options. And, one that's maybe talked about the least is maybe the young guy's not doing enough to win it and them just handing it over to AJ Klein, who's done it in the past for Sean McDermott. I don't think I'm projecting him to be the odds-on favorite here. If anything, I probably lean after a really strong spring to Terrell Bernard. But I'm not counting out Dorian Williams. Like, where do you kind of stand here as we start to project what this thing looks like at middle linebacker?
Yeah, it's unpredictable right now, and that's going to be the beauty of training camp. And I recently did a spot with WGR, and that was one of the main talking points is if you were put on the spot right now, who do you think is going to be the week one starter out there? And I didn't go the AJ Klein route, which I think that's a very safe option. But I went with a semi-safe option with Tyrell Dodson. I said, here's someone that knows the system, someone that still has some of those athletic traits. When he's been out there on the field, when Edmonds has missed a game, or they needed him out there in a pinch, he's looked the part. Now he's had his own history with injuries and things like that, where it's kept him off the field at times. But I feel like he might be one of those safer options right up there with AJ Klein. And but I also said I think at some point this season, week 4, week 6 range, they're going to hand it off to one of those young guys, whether it's Dorian Williams, who they like the traits, or whether it be a Terrell Bernard, who's been very impressive this spring. And if he can carry that over into the summer, might end up being the best man for the job there. He's bulked up. He knows the defense. He has a year's worth of knowledge of an advantage, so to speak, in that regard over a Dorian Williams. But I think one of those two young guys will eventually get the job. But starting out, I could see this being another case of Sean McDermott saying, let's play it safe. Let's go with someone that knows my scheme, that I know is going to not, he's going to be able to relay plays to the other guys on the defense. He's going to know everyone's lined up where they need to be. It's the little things that I think go a long way early on in the season. And for that reason, I have Dodson right now, perhaps starting opposite Milano at linebacker.
Yeah, I think that's probably the safest bet. And I think I'm very interested to see how Dodson in that role, if he were to win it, how he handles the load of playing as much as he's going to be playing, which is a big flip. I mean, he's been primarily a special teamers over the course of his career. I'd be interested to talk to him as we get to training camp about what he did to maybe get his body ready for what's going to now be this grind, because you can win that job and then get into the early part of the season, get banged up. He went in against Miami. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. I think it might've been the year before. Had a start. In that start, he got injured because, he's not used to playing these kinds of snaps after, playing at Texas A&M, being a UDFA. Between Bernard and Williams, to me, it's just going to be about how quickly Williams can get up to speed. And I think Bernard, the way that Bobby Babich talks about Bernard and his willingness to do whatever they ask him to do, Sean McDermott kind of throwing along some praise for him as well over the course of the last couple of weeks. I think that positions him nicely. And I think even if you're excited about Williams' speed ability to get him on the field, I think there's ways to get him on the field, as we've seen in Sean McDermott's defense in years past, where he doesn't have to be the middle linebacker. You can put him in some type of Sam role as a blitzing linebacker, like having multiple looks, really go maybe even big nickel at points. If you like his speed and his ability to move all across the place, maybe sub in Dorian Williams for a Saran Neal if he is somebody that shows he can, show up in coverage. But I really like Terrell Bernard's mindset. I mentioned that I spoke to him a couple weeks ago. Still working on that story. It's been a couple of days off here after the slog of draft and then into the minicamp season. That'll be out shortly. But I feel like he gives you such a steady presence, knowing how bad it went last year in the one opportunity that he got and everything he took from that and learned. I think he's going to give Dotson a lot of competition. And I think that there is a ceiling with Dotson that might not be there with Terrell Bernard. Go back and listen to the way that Sean McDermott talked about this kid when they drafted him, the conversations he had with his coach down at Baylor, what they liked about him to maybe reach on him. I wonder at times if this wasn't a guy that Sean McDermott was pounding the table for, if this isn't something that maybe he kind of pushes if it's super close at the end of training camp and preseason.
Yeah, if all things are close, by all means, go with the young guy. Let him get those reps. And this was a player that was here pre-Sean McDermott by a year. But, sometimes those special teams to defensive switches work. Lorenzo Alexander, for instance, he comes in. He was a special teams guy for a lot of his career, was a Pro Bowler in that regard, comes to Buffalo. First season, he just lights up the defensive stat sheet, leads the team in sacks, and he was like a very solid linebacker for him, for Sean McDermott when he came in 2017 for a few years. So every now and then you do get players like that. Tyrell Dodson, I'm not saying he's going to, be a 12 sack guy for this team. That'd be crazy. But every now and then you do get those players that can transition from special teams to being a solid defensive contributor. Terrell Bernard, you mentioned it. The team fell in love with him last year in the draft process. They held a private workout with him, and they said how quickly he picked up things and he understood the responsibilities and the way he moved on the field and the way he was able to absorb everything. We didn't see that during his rookie season. You mentioned it. Kind of looked like a deer in the headlights when he was out there on the field at times when he was given those opportunities. Now, though, you mentioned numerous times in our podcast how impressive he looked during the spring. You wrote about him. There's something about that year 1 to year 2 leap where you get a checklist from your head coach, your defensive coordinators, even maybe the front office in terms of here's what we need from you this offseason. And that can be your main focus. I know the system. I need to bulk up. I need to work on these aspects of my game. And lo and behold, he comes in this spring and he looks the part. He looks like a third-round pick, a day 2 pick in the draft that maybe is going to come in and make an impact this year. Dorian Williams could do that for this team year 1, right out of the gate. But it's not just knowing where you're supposed to be. It's also the responsibility of the linebacker, the middle linebacker, in terms of getting the plays in, making sure your guys are lined up in the right spot. So I want to see him be able to absorb all of that this summer too when he's given opportunities, because that's going to go a long way at training camp, in these preseason games, to determining who wins that job.
It's funny. I'm sitting here thinking back on the Elam conversation a little bit, and it kind of leads me into an interesting transition for my final position battle. We have 2 different ones that we're going to talk about here really quickly. Spencer Brown is such an interesting comparison to Kaiir Elam, isn't he? If you sit back and think about it, guy is a 3rd-round draft pick, obviously traits off the charts. The RAS score, his potential flashes that he's shown his first 2 years. What do the Bills do this offseason, Ryan? They don't bring in any competition for Spencer Brown. He is, at this point, locked in at right tackle. I know that Brandon Shell's there. I know that David Quessenberry is back. I know that Tommy Doyle, I guess, is in the mix as well. This is Spencer Brown's job, man. I don't see a scenario where he doesn't win it, and it's why it's not my 3rd position battle. My 3rd position battle is actually right guard. But before we get to it, this team throws curveballs at you with the way that they treat different situations. It's like Spencer Brown, come hell or high water, no matter what the situation, they are riding with him. They are giving him the opportunities. It's the complete opposite for Kaiir Elam, and it's an interesting juxtaposition. And I know it's they play on different side of the ball, they play different positions, but I think Kaiir Elam would benefit from the same approach they're taking with Brown, and I think he's earned more.
Yeah. I agree with that. And listen, when it comes to Spencer Brown, this could be something where if he flops, they could turn it over to a Brandon Shell at some point. But I agree. They brought Shell in so late during the offseason that I think they view him as a swing tackle, someone that if he has to start, they're comfortable with that, especially on the right-hand side. But it's interesting because all offseason, we heard, especially from Brandon Beane, he went to bat numerous times for Spencer Brown. Hey, this is a guy that didn't get to play his senior season. His team, he could have transferred elsewhere, but he wanted to, remain part of that team. He did training all that off season. Last year, he dealt with this back injury. He missed all of the spring and a lot of the summer, and we had to kind of get him up to speed. These were things that Brandon Beane was saying. And at one point before the draft and before free agency, you're sitting there saying, okay, is this him trying to get other teams off the scent of the Bills might be interested in upgrading at right tackle during free agency if the right guy comes along, or during the draft early on? They had opportunities in both areas and they did not address it. So everything that Brandon Beane was saying about Spencer Brown, he truly believes in my eyes at this point. And now it's up to Spencer Brown to come out there and prove him right, prove that I'm healthy, prove that I'm going to take a big leap in play from year 2 to year 3. He had moments as a rookie. I didn't feel he had as many moments last year. I need to see that this year with a lot more consistency because, protecting Josh Allen has to be your number one key overall for this team to be able to get to the Super Bowl this year, to win the Super Bowl this year. And going into training camp, if I'm asked who the weak link is on that line, it's Spencer Brown.
Yeah, I'm looking. I saw a comment in here that Brandon Shell is better than Spencer Brown. I think you're really picking at the bottom of the barrel based on both of these guys and what they put on tape in the NFL. I just quickly looked up their PFF grades, and actually, they're from a pass blocking perspective. Brandon Shell was a bit better, or overall perspective, Brandon Shell was a little bit better. Pass blocking, Ryan, they were both graded out. Both of them had more than 760 snaps. Brown had 982. 51.7 grade for Brandon Shell, 51.6 grade for Spencer Brown. So they're equally bad. 109 and 110 ranked tackles in professional football last year. Shell gave up 40 pressures. Spencer Brown gave up a league worst. I'm sorry. It wasn't a league worst. I'm sorry. Fifth worst 50 pressures according to PFF last season. It was not good a second year for Spencer Brown. And I think that they know that. But I think that there's also, because of the upside, I really like the approach they're taking with him. Like, not going out and bringing in significant competition potentially muddies the water. That competition has to come in and outslot the guy and be the answer there. Otherwise, you're in this like murky, muddy water that I don't think you want to be in, which I think you're in at CB2.
Yeah, upside and age matter at this position, and Shell's over 30. Shell can come in, like I said, in a pinch. If there's an injury, you're going to feel comfortable with him, but you don't want to defer the job to him, considering things are pretty equal in terms of their pass block rating. And that's the most important area, in my opinion, when it comes to this team. And this is a pass-first team. I think they'll run the ball a little bit more this year. They invested in the running game. They invested in the O-line, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But you're still going to be throwing it a lot with Josh Allen. And with all things considered equal between Shell and Brown based on their play last year, you go with the young guy. You let him go out there and try to prove that he is the man for the job. And that starts, obviously, here at St. John Fisher College in the very near future.
Somebody said here that Kaiir Elam can't play in this scheme. And I think it's so interesting that people go to that like black and white view of these kinds of things in football. Like Tre'Davious White was primarily a press man corner at LSU. Listen to this from his scouting report. Full-time starter, one of the premier mirror and match cornerbacks in the game, has the feet, athleticism, and instincts for prolonged coverage responsibilities, and his twitch will always have him near the throw. Best suited for all forms of man coverage. Tre'Davious White. who's been one of the elite premier off corners in the NFL since getting drafted by the Bills. It's not a plug and play league. You have to learn. You have to fail. Like now, Tre'Davious White came in and he picked it up pretty quickly. He was pretty good from the beginning. In 17, he didn't have the kind of struggles with it that I think Elam has shown. But not everybody's going to get it right away. Sometimes you need time on task. And Sean McDermott has mentioned it a million times. It's all about repetitions at a spot. And I get getting the practice reps, but some people need the live reps too.
Yeah. And the Bills wouldn't go out and draft a guy if they felt like they couldn't get him to fit into said scheme. That would be a waste of a first round pick. You don't want to go out there and only address players that fit your scheme. In certain years, yes, there are first round pedigree players that are a better fit for you. And if all things are considered equal in terms of their upside, but one is more zone heavy than man heavy in your zone team, yeah, you're probably going to go that route. And I still believe McDuffie might have been their target, and then the Chiefs leapfrogged them and took him. There's been articles that have speculated that as well. So we don't know, and we won't know, but they liked Elam enough to trade up for him after that took place and to bring him in. And they felt that the athleticism was there, the traits were there. You just gave a great example with Trey White in terms of not all of these guys that they've drafted have been perfect scheme fits for this team, and yet they can adapt, they can learn it, and then they can excel in that area. So I still have high hopes for Kaiir Elam in terms of fitting into this defense. They need to let him use his traits to get better and give him those live reps. And that's what I'm hoping we see this year.
We're going to get a lot of live reps on Friday night, Ryan Talbot, out at Wingnut, 700 Military Road. If you're just stopping in, thank you. Welcome. Make sure you get us on your calendar. Somebody asked earlier in the show, what time should you come out? Well, what time are you going to get there, Ryan? Because I'm going to be a little late this time. That's why we moved the time back to 8. I'm hoping to get there by like 7:30. What time are you planning to be there?
Yeah, I'm hoping to be there 7:30.
Okay.
I think we're going to come up kind of early on Friday, make an afternoon, an evening out of it. So I'm hoping to be there around 7:30. Make my way around early to anyone that gets there pre-show. We get a lot of people that get in there right around at the start of our show, and then after, though, like you said, we go around. Obviously the show takes place in Buffalo. So sometimes you get someone in a Bills hat, Bills shirt that comes in, you assume they're there for us, but like Matt said, come up, talk to us, introduce yourselves. We love to interact with you, before the show, after the show. And like you said, we might be there and close the place down on Friday night.
Definitely will close the place down. I'll be there at the latest by 7:45. Our intern Peter is actually coming up for the show, so he will be there getting everything set up. Say hi to him. Come over and talk some Bills with him. But I'd say come out anytime after 6:37. Get yourself set up. Get yourself some wings. Try out all the different flavors. Get a beer. It's going to be a great time. Final topic here, our last position battle that we're looking at. We're going to go in different directions. We'll do it like rapid fire style. I'll talk about mine, you hit yours, and then we'll hit the road. Right guard. I think left guard is going to materialize as Connor McGovern's spot. They paid him, right? He was an early in free agency kind of guy. He plays left guard. I think he's going to be comfortable there. He did it last year in Dallas, and I think he's going to end up slotting over there. So over at right guard, it's interesting to me because I think Ryan Bates probably is the odds-on favorite to win that job. But man, I just cannot get off of David Edwards' familiarity with Cromer. And I know how much he likes one guy in his system that can kind of show the others the ropes when it comes to how he wants techniques taught. This is a guy that came into the league and went through what a lot of these guys are going through. Like he's been, I think, 2 or 3 years with Cromer in LA, credits him for a lot of his development. And I think he's right in the mix. I also think Ike Butker, I am not ruling him out. He basically last year was a completely lost season, had the Achilles tendon injury that cost him most of last year. And when he got back, it's kind of a slow grind back. He's looked great all spring. I expect him to get back into that situation, get competitive. That's what he's done since the Bills signed him as a UDFA all those years ago out of Iowa. So I'm really looking forward to that right guard competition because I think it's an important spot, and it'll tell us a lot about how they want to utilize Ryan Bates. I mean, elbow surgery, ankle surgery for Mitch Morse coming into, I believe it's his 9th or 10th NFL season. He's not getting any younger. And I think if you go a different direction than Bates at right guard, you could have Rick Bates there in case something goes down with Mitch Morse.
And just really quickly touching upon that before I go into mine, you still have Torrance as well, a second-round pick that you have in the guard mix, overall guard mix. It's a good problem to have so much competition. I've mentioned this before. I almost wonder if Ryan Bates' versatility is going to be a nail in his coffin, so to speak, because you just mentioned Mitch Morse. I think there are 4 spots on this line, minus left tackle, that you could sit there and say, man, I'd feel good about Ryan Bates if he had to come in a pinch and play left guard, center, right guard, even right tackle. He's such a good player across the board that the Bills might sit there and say, at the end of the day, with injuries taking place, maybe this guy should be on the bench for us because we can get him in there in these different spots if something happened to Mitch Morse, if something happened with McGovern, maybe whether it's play, whether it's injury, etc. So it's going to be one of the more interesting battles to watch, not just right guard overall in my eyes, guard spots in general. So many good players. And again, great problem to have if you're the Bills. For
Go ahead. Let me get one more thing on this, and then we'll move on to yours. I didn't mention Torrance, maybe subconsciously thinking of Kaiir Elam and maybe them talking so much about him needing to work on his technique, getting a chance to talk to Mitch Morse about him last week. He mentioned how much work he's doing, and he's a sponge, but there is work to be done with the way that they ask their guards, their tackles to play football. It might be a little bit too large of a learning curve for Torrance to be ready to win that job right out of training camp. And they don't have time to wait for a rookie at that spot. I mean, they need their most dependable players at those 5 spots. I think it's almost different than cornerback in the sense that you need guys that you can rely upon because of what it means for the most important guy on the field for the Bills. That's Josh Allen. But I do think that if Torrance does, find his way on the other end of that learning curve, I think he could get real interesting there. I'd be interested to see if after he played so much left guard in college, if they try him at right guard just because maybe they like McGovern at left, maybe they move McGovern over to right. I don't know how that ends up ultimately working out, and I can't tell you where they all played over the last couple of weeks, but I agree with your point. I think that's going to be very interesting to watch how those, positions are set up throughout training camp.
Yeah. And lastly on Torrance, I don't know if the Bills would do it. I don't know if it'd be smart. When you're in those 3rd and inches, 4th and inches scenarios where you almost feel like it's going to be Josh Allen time, would you put him in there because he is a mauler? He's supposed to be stronger in the run game. Yes, it might lead to more predictable calls or defenses thinking what they're going to do, but then even the Bills could feed off of that. Something to get him some of those live reps that we're saying Kaiir Elam needs. It's going to be so interesting to watch and see how they handle him this year. For me, for my other position battle, it's a little more generic. I want to know who steps up at receiver other than Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. And this is not a Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox conversation. I expect them to be heavily involved in this offense. I want to know who steps up, though, in that wide receiver 3 role. Is it going to be a Deontay Hardy, who, in terms of the salaries that they gave out this year at wide receiver, he was the one that was paid. He was the one that is that yard after catch player that I feel like they've lacked on this team the past few seasons, but he's a smaller receiver. Is he someone, the durability? He missed a lot of time last year with a foot injury. So you have him as one option. You have Trent Sherfield, who Josh Allen really spoke up over the spring, talked about getting some reps with him, really liking his game. Those are 2 guys that pop into my mind immediately. Khalil Shakir, year 2, someone that a year ago was a fan favorite in terms of where he was drafted, where a lot of draft analysts said that they thought he could go. I've talked about players making that leap from year 1 to year 2, knowing what areas of the game they need to work on. Tons of videos this offseason of Shakir working out with Eric Moulds, former Bills great. That does not mean that he's going to all of a sudden be this great receiver. Don't get me wrong, in the NFL. But I like to see the work that he was doing. I like to see when players are training alongside these former guys that were great. Eric Moulds in a different team with a different quarterback, I think he's a Hall of Fame player. I just think that he didn't play with a lot of very good quarterbacks in his tenure in Buffalo, and that hurt him at times. So I like the work of those guys. And there's others too, Matt. So for me, it comes down to who's going to step up other than the guys that Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis.
So we're going to get out of here because we were going to go 30. We're almost at 40. We're going to save a little bit more for Friday night. The plan is to talk a little bit more Stephon Diggs, and we're going to morph that into a Sean McDermott conversation and sprinkle in a little bit of Brandon Beane as well. I have some thoughts on a lot of that I want to get into. I believe Nate Geary is coming out, so he'll have takes on takes on takes. We're going to have a 53-man roster projection up at the website here coming up pretty soon. So we'll start to dive into that a little bit, and maybe we'll each, if the three of us are there, maybe we'll do one player that we're pounding the table for to make this 53-man roster, and we'll talk that through on Friday night. It's going to be fun. I'm hoping a ton of people are out. I hope we maybe even get out on the patio. If you have strong takes and you get out there early enough and you want come on for a little segment of the show, I'm always open to it. 700 Military Road, shout at Wingnuts. If you are coming out and you do want to appear on the show, I know our good buddy Michael Partham was always first in line for those kinds of segments. Hit me up beforehand so I can start planning this thing out, where the segments are going to be, and we're going to have a lot of fun on Friday night, Ryan.
Yeah, you cannot beat the atmosphere at Wingnuts. Great times, great food, great beer. You can't go wrong with their wings either. I mean, it's right in the name, but there's some other options, some chicken sandwiches, the pizzas now. You name it, they're getting pretty deep in terms of their depth chart when it comes to the food options at Wingnuts. Join us there Friday night, 8 p.m.
We'll see you then, everybody. He's Ryan. I'm Matt. Have a great one.